Welcome to the Take the North podcast. I'm David Haugh on the Mully and Haugh show. Dan Wiederer from the Chicago Tribune at Haugh covering the Bears. Big week. The Bengals and the Bears play Saturday on the lakefront. They have a practice that was closed to the public because of weather on Thursday. Dan, though, the big news is Joe Burrow's in town. I think Joe Burrow's in town. I think Caleb Williams, for one brief moment this week, might not be the best quarterback in Chicago right now.
Yeah, another number one pick who's been to a Super Bowl. So if Caleb can match that feat pretty quickly here in his career, he'll have a lot of people in town really ready to jump on board the bandwagon, as if it's not already filling up pretty rapidly.
That's the standard, and let's start there. We'll get to a Hard Knocks mini review. We'll look at the offensive line. We'll talk about what the Bears tried to do to bolster their pass rush. But I think all conversations about the Bears this week in this training camp, whether Joe Burrow is here or not, begin with Caleb Williams. Where is he at? Have you seen him throw? What did you think? And those are fun conversations because, Dan, I think the best way that I could summarize it, as I tried to last night to somebody, is the Bears are about a month into training camp. So it's been a month since they started practicing and looking toward this season, which is full of hope and expectation. And I think that you look at the offense, and it is a rookie quarterback, but Caleb Williams is not the biggest question about this offense to me. And I think that says a lot about the kind of progress that he has made.
Well, look, like the Bears really benefited from a nice step forward in Buffalo. What was 2 possessions and 20 snaps in the first quarter at Highmark Stadium gave the outside world a glimpse into some of the gifts that this franchise knows Caleb has. And I think that's really beneficial from a public perception standpoint because it takes some of the load off Caleb Williams. If Caleb Williams had gone out in Buffalo and played the way he had played in so many training camp practices here in Lake Forest, the conversation in Chicago might be different this week, but he didn't. He showed some of those playmaking gifts. He showed that pocket presence. He showed that feel, and he led the Bears on 2 lengthy scoring drives that gave the city of Chicago and Bears fans and really the NFL observing world at large a feel for like, okay, it's in there. That's what people wanted to see in August. Now it's about building on that. And I think one of the coolest things about Caleb in the month of August is that he has had those struggles at training camp. And the Bears have been very intentional with him in sort of reminding him to lean into the struggle, that the struggle is actually avenue to growth. And when you can go back that up, as Matt Eberflus said on Saturday afternoon in Buffalo, with some results that then are the fruits of your labor, is how Matt described it, then you've got something there, right? You've got a little momentum. You've got a little something to build off as they go into the second half of August.
We broke down some of that in the pod that I did with Adam when you were gone, Dan, but I think that it bears repeating because all week it's been conversation around town. It wasn't as, I think the one thing about, you saw the arm talent and you saw the poise and you saw the command and all those things, but almost as impressive as the execution was the explanation.
Sure.
And when you see him kind of breaking down what happened in real time and explaining that in a way, it helps you understand as a media core or a fan base even, why he relates so well to teammates, because that communication, as we saw a glimpse of in Hard Knocks, and we'll get to that, his ability to communicate what he wants to see and his ability to be just forthcoming with so much is definitely makes him a good teammate and a good leader, and I think a smart quarterback. And that's something that I think stood out about the Bills' performance.
Well, I was going to describe it as engaged communication, right? And there's a level of willingness there that's obvious, and I think it's what you described. It's why his personality is as magnetic as it is, because even on the pass that he missed in the back of the end zone to Roma Dunze on an extended play scramble drill, the two of them go back to the sideline immediately and start talking about what they saw on the play and what they need to do going forward. And I was encouraged by that sequence as any of the plays that Caleb actually made in that game, because it's a sign of a rookie who has the comfort now, albeit with another rookie, to go up to him immediately after play ends and say, this is what I want. When we get that kind of look, when we're sitting in that type of situation, here's where I want to go with the football. Here's where you can meet me to make that catch. And those are two guys that should have a long and healthy career together. And I thought that was a really cool moment within a small snapshot of an afternoon in August.
What's the expectation and evaluation process against the Bengals? What are they looking for? The next step in terms of progress for him? Obviously, the practice probably is as important, if not more so, than the games, depending on how many snaps Caleb Williams plays Saturday. But it's also likely to be against a Bengal defense that could get some of the afternoon off. So the practice is key. When they do that, the public won't be able to see it because of the weather. But in terms of what the plan was, if they had their coaches meeting going out and they're talking to him, what are they looking for?
Yeah. So as you mentioned, like we are recording this episode before the Bears step on the practice field with the Bengals, and then we'll get a little better feel for what the situations the Bears want to work are. The cool part of these crossover practices, these joint practices, is that you can come together with the opposing coaching staff and say, here's some areas where we really need work. What are some areas you really need work in? And marry those two things together in a way where you can script a lot of this stuff. You can get a lot of valuable reps in a competitive environment in a controlled setting. And so, as it relates to Caleb and the offense, you just want to see that continued command, that ability to handle the operation, to get out of the huddle, to be able to know what you're seeing before the snap, to know what the reaction to what you're seeing is going to be, and just having that clean kind of flow to all of it, right? No matter what the results of the drive are, you want that clean, continued flow to continue so that you can build some of that offensive momentum. We saw a lot of that in Buffalo. You want to see more of that against the Bengals, both in the practice setting and if Matt is willing to put his first team offense out on the field on Saturday at Soldier Field in that setting as well. And you just want to continue to see the growth and the ability to build on things that you're already doing. I think Caleb has shown a really good feel already for making mistakes and understanding why the mistake was made, and then trying to go about the troubleshooting effort to fix it so that it is not a recurring mistake for the duration of camp.
You learn anything about Shane Waldron you didn't know and think is valuable?
It's still too early, and like I think it's really easy to be a knee jerk armchair quarterback after a preseason game and feel like you've learned all these things about the offense and that, oh, this is 180 degrees different than anything Luke Getzey ever tried. It's like, okay, let's wait until we start seeing different looks from defenses. Let's see an offense that's able to game plan, an offense that's able to adjust on the fly, which is supposed to be one of Shane's strengths when we get into the regular season. So I'm not ready to really make any sort of broad brush judgments on Shane Waldron here. You do things that are comfortable for your quarterback. That was certainly apparent in the 20 snaps in Buffalo. You're able to set up some of the play action stuff with your run game. I thought that was really cool, was establishing DeAndre Swift early, and then the play to Komet, the 26-yarder that was highly evaluated on social media as a play that really, I said after the game, and maybe I was too nonchalant about it, that it felt like the play design there did all the heavy lifting. I've got the benefit of sitting in a press box behind the play and seeing Caleb take the snap and seeing Cole get a clean release and be open from really the minute he started his route. And so I said to Biggs, less than a breath after the snap, this is going to Cole. And eventually Caleb completes his fake, gets out on the run, and is able to pump fake the rusher and then deliver a dime. But some of that is just a play design, putting him in position to be successful and then letting his God-given gifts take over.
Yeah, because I mean, how many times over the last 10 years have you said, okay, he's going to be open, the play's going to him, and then there's a duck that's quacking in the flailing in the wind at Soldier Field, and the quarterback can't deliver the ball where it's supposed to be
Right.
delivered. And this is what was exciting about that play was just because of the arm talent, and it completed the process and the play, and it gets you excited, even though it's a meaningless completion in August. It kind of was the play that you take
Yeah.
away and you remember.
No question. And you need more of those. You need to
Yeah,
stack those, and you need to
right.
have a series of those so that you go in to September feeling good about yourselves. And I really appreciated Caleb after the game, David, just talking about one, how game day brings out sort of just a natural focus spike in him, that it just, that's the definition of a gamer, somebody that gets up on game day and feels like, yeah, this is my time, this is my stage and I'm going to go perform. And then also his perspective to understand that, look, like I'm leaving Buffalo feeling really good about what we put on the field for a quarter, while also having a much wider perspective of understanding how much work is left to be done. And I thought that was pretty cool for both him and Matt to kind of describe that, because that is kind of the way you have to ride this roller coaster, because there's going to be moments you have to embrace and then moments you just have to say, all right, we got to move on and get to the heavy lifting.
The offensive line played without Nate Davis against the Bills. His status, he's been back at practice, Dan. I'm curious to see how much he participates against the Bengals and if he gets a chance to play on Saturday. There's so much attention. He's mentioned all the time. He's one of these guys you wonder if too much is made about the value of a right guard. And yet there was a time in Chicago where the right guard was the best player on the team. So I kind of have to find a middle ground there. Ryan Bates has been injured on and off. You've got Coleman Shelton, who might be taking advantage of all this and solidifying himself at the center position. How would you think that the offensive line will line up against the Bengals during practice, or what is their number one offensive line as we sit here?
Well, look, like I was asked on the Mully and Haugh show on Wednesday, which did not feature either Mully or Haugh, by the way, about the ramp up period for Nate Davis and how that was an encouraging sign. And I said, look, like the ramp up period is the period that Nate Davis is always in. Like I'm tired of talking about Nate Davis ramping up. I want to see 3 to 4 to 5 to 6 consecutive weeks of Nate Davis practicing and playing in games, so you feel like he is ready to go for the long haul. You've got your left side of the line solidified with Braxton Jones and Tevin Jenkins. You're still got that center position that you got to figure out. Bates' absence changes the equation a little bit, and it also provides an opening for Nate Davis to get back in there and sort of reclaim what should be his if he's willing to grind through and make it his. And so then you have to recalibrate where you're going to be at center this week. If Bates is out, Shelton's going to stay at center, and then you're going to have obviously Darnell Wright at right tackle and trying to do the things he can do. But look, like cohesion on the offensive line is a must here. Like we're reaching the stage of the preseason where that has to become the priority for everyone involved, coaches and players. And so hopefully they get there really soon, and we don't have to have a weekly discussion on who's in, who's out, and which way are they pivoting.
Before we talk about some of the other things and look at Hard Knocks, I'm kind of curious what you think about the running back position. There's a lot of attention because of the Velus Jones move, and the fact that he had a pretty good showing, at least out of the backfield. He beat the guy to the pylon. I know he was running against backups, but I think that adds a level of intrigue. You've got Khalil Herbert, who still is there and is a veteran guy, Roschon Johnson, and of course DeAndre Swift. And then here's Ian Wheeler, who gets a lot of time on Hard Knocks. We'll talk about that, but he certainly looks like he's got some skills. How do you look at the whole position? And are the Bears? Is this a situation you think is common on all teams? Because running backs, you have to have some talent to be in an NFL training camp. And I think the Bears have 5 guys I just rattled off that have specific talents and all belong on an NFL roster, arguably.
This is the advantage of building a competitive roster, right? It provides you quality depth in case something goes haywire, and it also creates the need for guys to earn their roster spot. Velus Jones is in year 3. He was drafted as a wide receiver. He hasn't panned out there. They're trying a little desperation move to put him in the backfield and see if he can be kind of this all-purpose weapon, similar to how the Falcons have used Cordero Patterson, over the last several years and found some success there. But you've got an uphill battle to claim a roster spot when there's so many other guys already in that room who have proven ability at that position. I thought Brad Biggs did a nice job with Velus in his 10 thoughts piece coming out of the Buffalo game of describing that this isn't just about putting the ball in a guy's hands and saying, go make a play for us. The running back position is more sophisticated than that. You got to know how to pick up defenders and pass protection. You got to know where your eyes need to be in blitz pickup. That you have to know where your landmarks are for mesh points on handoffs so that you don't trip over the quarterback's feet and fall down in the backfield as happened on one carry in Buffalo. And so it's more than just using speed and explosion. And so there's some temporary intrigue here in Velus, but I think he's got a long climb to go to earn his roster spot here. And so you talk about those guys. You talk about DeAndre Swift clearly being the lead back. You talk about Roschon Johnson being a guy that this coaching staff and front office believes in. Well, now you got to start to figure out who else can we fit in that room if we are indeed going to carry a fullback and carry Blasingame. And so there's a lot that goes into that. There's special teams work that goes into that. It's a crowded place. I will say, as it relates to Ian Wheeler, the NFL created a practice squad for just this very situation. If you can get a guy through waivers after final cuts and put him on your practice squad, you can take a longer look at a guy who clearly has some talent, clearly has a cool backstory as diagnosed or documented on Hard Knocks, and now has the 2 more preseason games to continue showing himself to this coaching staff that he belongs as part of their mix here, whether it's on the 53 or the 15-man practice squad.
Let's talk about the defensive end position. So the Bears reportedly were one of the teams in the mix for Matthew Judon, went to the Falcons for a 3rd-round pick. Presumably that 3rd-round pick, if the reports are accurate, Dan, obviously the Bears were talking 3rd-round pick too, but there's an expectation the Falcons pick would be higher. You go down that road with every draft as considered and executed. If they're going after a 32-year-old pass rusher and unwilling to give up a 3rd-round pick, on one hand, you say, well, they're going after a pass rusher because they know that spot is still unsettled and needs some help. On the other, you're like, well, if they're not desperate enough to give up more than a third round pick, it says that they might have confidence in Austin Booker after the kind of training camp he's putting together. How did you interpret the Matthew Judon news?
So this is layered because if you're Ryan Poles, you sit in a chair and you understand that a player is going to be made available, and so your first call is to Elliot Wolf in New England, and you say, okay, what are we looking for? What's the price tag on this? What's the compensation in a possible trade? And the second part of this is understanding that at 32 years old, Matthew Judon is in another contract year, and so do you want to rent him for 1 year? Do you want to sign him to a longer term extension? If it's the latter, how much are you willing to put in, not having him in your building yet, not really knowing what you want to do long term? And so I think there was a calculus here that Ryan had to use to figure out what are we after here in terms of going after short term success, and what are we after in terms of building long term roster quality, right? And so I think that's part of this, and so if the I don't know what the Falcons, I haven't seen what the Falcons ultimately have decided about the long-term plans for Matthew Judon, but that's part of this conversation, because Ryan's got to reach out then after talking to Elliot Wolf to Demarius Bilbo, the agent, and say, like, what are we looking for here? What are the extension requests? How long are we talking? What can get done here? And so that's where I say it's multi-layered, because it's not just as simple as saying, okay, player for a pick and then bring him into the building. You have to be looking at your roster and your plans for 25, 26, 27, and figuring out if this would impact that at all beyond just the third round pick that you'd have to give up.
So does the same calculus apply to whether or not you're considering making a run at Hassan Reddick? Because I think it's a different player. It's a more impactful player. I think more proven, younger player. You would probably be in a position to give up more. It's going to cost more. But and there's for the record, I mean, there've been no reports that the Bears have been talking to the Jets. And
I don't think the Jets are taking any calls right now for obvious reasons.
Well, not that we know of, but yeah, I mean, I say this only. This is almost like it should be a disclaimer. 6 years ago this month, I think that we were all talking, well, there's no way the Raiders are going to trade Khalil Mack. I mean, because Reggie McKenzie said there's no way they're trading Khalil Mack, and Khalil Mack's not going to end up. Oh, wait. Labor Day weekend, it was blown for everybody. So I want to cover the ground before we have to cover the ground.
Just so our audience knows, I made a declaration on a radio station across town that if the Bears traded for Khalil Mack, I would do a show down on State Street with my shirt off, and I eventually had to pay up on that on that vow. So you're right; it's fair to remind me that sometimes things come out in the ways you least expect them to, no matter what you're thinking about.
Proud moment for you.
Not exactly. With Reddick, I think it's more complex because of the money that you've invested in Montez Sweat, and you have to understand, obviously, that the salary cap continues to rise, but there's still a salary cap, and you have to be budgeting to figure out how you want to address certain levels of your team, whether it's your passing game, whether it's your pass defense, whether it is affecting the quarterback, whether it's your quarterback themselves. And so I feel like the price tag on Reddick is going to be higher than Judon, and so that creates a layer of complexity to it that affects your long-term planning as you're trying to build this roster out. Do you feel good about Montez Sweat being able to work with just somebody across from him that's an upgrade from what they have now, or somebody that's in the building that can improve and grow into that role? Or do you feel like you need two, high-powered elite pass rushers to get to where you want to go to? If you make that decision, you are allocating resources there that cannot be allocated elsewhere, if that makes sense. And so you have to be constantly looking at both sides of the ball, all three phases, figuring out where you want to spend your money and spend your resources. And I think in the Reddick situation, it's more complex because of that.
I'll say this. That's a good explanation. I look at the amount of money and cash that the Bears have, the outlay for cash. And I think there's a stat out there. You can find it on one of the Spot Rack or one of the websites. But the Bears spending has been pretty significant this offseason. So the cash that they have paid out. And I wonder how that would factor into any decision to go after Hassan Reddick or even begin that conversation. Because I think if you start the conversation, you have to be willing to finish it and finish the job if you're Ryan Poles. So I don't even know. We don't have any reports. We're talking about this hypothetically. So I do wonder about that. I also wonder about the cap allocations we talked about. Do you really want to have your edge rushers or one position, really, the edge rusher, being occupied and dominated by two guys of Sweat and Reddick that would really eat up a ton of cap
A
space.
lot. Yeah, a lot for sure.
It's like wide receivers. Do you really want to have? You look at the typical wide receiver room. You have your guy you're going to pay, and then somebody else is kind of second. Who's the secondary guy between Reddick and Sweat? Well, I don't know, and I don't know if you can pay both of them that way. So I think it's a fun hypothetical. I don't think it's terribly realistic, and yet I say that knowing that if the Bears find a way to pull this off, I think I'll be one of many people that would be excited about what that would mean to this defense, and I would adjust my expectations, much like I did in 2018 when they got Khalil Mack.
I'm reading a text from you right now while we're recording this podcast, and you said if Hassan Reddick plays one down in a Bears uniform, you will broadcast the Take the North podcast from the upper deck of Soldier Field in just your underwear. So
no,
it looks
that's not.
Studs timestamp this. That's a crazy text to get here on Thursday, August 15th, and we'll see where it goes.
My phone has been hacked.
I think you're pretty safe on that front. I think you explained it pretty well there. But I do think that the Bears' involvement in the Judon talks give you another bit of insight into where Ryan Poles is at in terms of his willingness to explore things, his urge to be competitive now, but also to do it as we've seen Ryan Poles do over his 3 years here in a practical manner that makes sense and is guided by discipline, and
right.
so that's part of the equation here at Haugh, and it's worked well to this point with where the roster building has gone.
Before we get out of here, let's talk about episode 2 of Hard Knocks. Once people got to see it, I wonder how much people enjoyed it. It was obviously there was delay for people streaming on Max, and then people had it on HBO. They were happy all along. What's the fuss about? I didn't mind it. I liked the first episode better. I like both episodes, Dan. I understand. I find some of the criticism, and there's been some of it out there, amusing to me. I don't really think there's, to me, much to criticize. I just it's there for, it's kind of it's a bonus if you're a football fan. It's like an extra. If you take away Hard Knocks, I'm not going to feel any differently about the offseason. The fact that you've added it to my consumption has increased my enjoyment of the preseason. So I like both episodes. I like the first one better.
Let me start here. In what way, particularly for a guy who has a bedtime, did you consume Hard Knocks on Tuesday? Was it via streaming or was it via cable?
I did it streaming.
So you stayed up?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. I didn't, but I have been sleeping in, as you know. When
right.
You say Mully and Haugh, we're not at Mully and Haugh. It's because Mully and Haugh are sleeping in this week.
So if you had the show, would you have been able to weather that delay?
Yeah, I would have. I mean, it was inconvenient, but I would have watched it, and I found a way to get to. I was on by 8:15, so I wasn't that put out by the whole thing.
A peek behind my curtain. I was in Saugatuck, Michigan, getting away with the family for a couple of days, and we had carved out time to sit down. Let's get that Hard Knocks episode rolling right at 9 Eastern time, and 9 Eastern time rolled around and it wasn't there, and 9:10 rolled around and it wasn't there, and 9:15 rolled around. And I said, I better check Twitter and see if anyone else is having this problem. And as it turned out, a lot of people were having that problem, and not just having that problem, they were having bigger problems with the meltdown that caused. I made it to about 10:10, and I said, there's no promise of when this thing's going to launch, so I'm going to go to bed. And then apparently about 5 minutes after I went to bed, it showed up in the streaming platform on Max, and people were able to watch it. Frustrating for sure. When I did get a chance to watch it the following day, I was a little disappointed. I'm with you that I liked episode 1 more than episode 2. My fear after episode 1 is that they were going to try to do too many things at once. And episode 2 felt like we're trying to do too many things at once. We're trying to tell 9 stories in a 55-minute block here. And so whether it's Rome Odunze singing, or Ian Wheeler potentially being a psychiatrist when he grows up, or DJ Moore going to the Museum of Ice Cream, which, by the way, I might need to check out with the kids at some point.
Just stay away from the hot dog ice cream. Oh my God. That's awful. That's an awful concept.
Really gross. It just felt like we were a ping pong ball through that episode and bouncing around too much. And there wasn't a lot of character development or guys, being someone that's here every day, that I was like, man, that episode really made me gravitate to their story and want to feel that out through the rest of August. And so that's my fear here, because I think that, we talked about last week, this Bears team has so many high profile center stage stories. You just stay there. Just stay with Caleb. Right. Stay with Jalen Johnson. Stay with Keenan Allen. And I know it's the preseason and we've got to incorporate a game in Buffalo and a game in Canton and what's going to be a game at Soldier Field against the Bengals and use that as sort of the main highway for this thing. But I just think they're missing some opportunities with the way they're bouncing around a little bit. And it did leave you wanting a little bit more after episode 2, in my opinion.
That's fair enough. I mean, you know the team as well as anybody. You know what is not being covered. I think that I think it's all fascinating behind the scenes. The funniest complaint that I have heard is that there's not enough profanity, which we know from talking to Shannon Furman that there's been an, I don't know if it's an edict, but certainly an awareness of trying to limit that. I find that kind of interesting that bothers certain people. I also feel like
I think there's probably a sense that it just sanitizes the experience a little too much, and that you're not getting the unfiltered look that you thought you might get, especially because it looked like some of these guys have been swearing openly at the dais on a daily basis. I mean, the Jalen Johnson Top 100 news conference was full of profanity, and they had to not only bleep that out, but in order to bleep it out, they had to use Mark Grote's pretty face in that episode to kind of bounce through it. So
Grote's
there's some of
star.
that. I will tell you this. Colleen Kane and I did run into George McCaskey coming off the practice field on Wednesday. We did ask him what he's thought so far of Hard Knocks, and George, in typical George fashion, said, "Looking forward to episode 5." So George's resistance has not come down much, although he did make sure to say with heartfelt conviction that he's really enjoyed the Hard Knocks crew and that they've been very easy to work with, and it hasn't been as intrusive or as destructive as he thought.
That's good. I find it enjoyable. I don't feel though. And I don't want this to come out the wrong way. I think some people are watching this feel like they're entitled to the show as they want it to be. Like they want everything and they want this, they want that. I just think that it's easier to just enjoy it, and I think it's well done.
It's a snack, and I think some people are looking for a meal, and so that's where the disconnect comes. Because David, I think that there's like, again, like you could do 50 minutes every single week on Caleb and you would have nothing but A-level content because it's such a fascinating journey that he's on. And when you're kind of narrowing that down to 6 minutes and this down to 6 minutes and that down to 6, probably the most compelling thing to me so far through 2 episodes is the Jonathan Owens, Simone Biles connection. That's been the most fun for me. And that little video they showed of him trying to race her in a rope climb. That was as good as it gets. I mean, that's a high-level NFL safety. That's funny. Torched on the rope, by his gymnastics wife.
I'm enjoying most the Caleb Williams experience, and kind of the kind of dichotomy between somebody who's still kind of childlike and a rookie and learning all the things, with the reality that he is a franchise quarterback and a leader on this group in a town that's crazy about him already, sight unseen almost, and before he's taken a first official snap, and he's got such an opportunity to do so much. And I think he's made for this role, and I think it's fun to see that kind of unfold, at least the first 2 episodes.
Well, and you use the phrase "made for this role," right? Like this is part of this going forward for hopefully the next 10 to 15 years of his life is being made for this role. And so I think that the comfort that he's showing, it's really a good glimpse for people on the outside to be like, oh, okay, maybe I did have some misconceptions about what this kid was going to come into his rookie season in the NFL and behave like, because he, without question, seems totally immersed in the present. And that's a really cool personality trait that Caleb has that I think the Bears fans will grow to love even more as we go forward.
Episode 3 next Tuesday night, 8:00 Chicago time, unless there's problems downloading it to Max. And we'll be back before that to talk about all things going on with the Bears here on the Take the North podcast and on the 670 Scores YouTube page. You can watch us. Anything else, Dan, before we get out of here?
Yeah, one quick note for anybody that's planning on heading down to Soldier Field on Saturday for the game. The DNC is in town. There's street closures. There's a lot of things going on. We will try to get all that information up at chicagotribune.com to help people navigate that. I know the Bears are encouraging people to get to Soldier Field extra early on Saturday for the noon kick, just to avoid some of the hassle. They're going to have a lot of pregame entertainment in the stadium starting at 10 a.m. It's just a PSA and a warning that if you're going down to the game, don't leave the house at 11:15 and expect to be in your seat for kickoff. So get ready, buckle in, and just plan accordingly.
Can you please make sure that Brad Biggs knows that we do not want Biggsy ruffled, have his feathers ruffled on Saturday
Brad
morning.
Never shows up in a press box ruffled. So
I want him to be in that calm Zen-like state all the time.
Will you be there?
I'm planning to be there.
Okay, then you can
Planning to
help
be
me.
there.
You can help me get him back in that calm zen like state after the ruffling occurs.
I'll do my best. All right. For Dan Wiederer and Adam Sadzinski, our producer, I'm David Haugh. Thank you for listening to the Take the North podcast and for watching on the Scores YouTube page. We'll talk to you next time.
Great talk. See you out there.